You're listening to Yoked, Conversations with Real-Life Yogis. I'm Kelly Sunrose, your host. The mission of this podcast is to share the teachings of yoga as applied to everyday life by real people through interviews, conversations, Q&A sessions, and more. Learn more at yokedpodcast.com. Hi, everybody. Thanks so much for being here today for this episode of Yoked. I'm Kelly, and it is a real treat for me to introduce today's guest, Devon Riley. In her own words, Devon practices and teaches yoga. She writes, she parents, reads books, makes photographs, grows food and flowers, and cooks dinner daily. She is a modern Buddhist, an intersectional feminist, and a talker. Devon's teaching and her own embodied awareness practice emphasizes practical physical skills for connecting with inner and outer support, noticing and integrating creative responses to discomfort, and reaching beyond cyclic self-talk to establish safe spaces of self-trust. Devon says, "I work hard to stay steady in my skin while making space for people where they are, as they are, to show up as they can." So, of course, she is a perfect fit for the conversations that we have here on Yoked, and I have been wishing and hoping to have Devon on the podcast for quite some time. She and I are also neighbors, which is fun. Thank you so much for being here, and thank you, Devon, for sharing your story, for sharing yourself, for sharing your teaching. A little bit of news before we hop in to this discussion. Some of you may have noticed that most of the archived practice podcasts have migrated away from this site over to our online community, the Wildcat Yoga Club. And soon, all of the archived practices will live over there in that library permanently. So if you are looking to practice together, no matter where you are in the world and on your own time, head on over to wildcatyogaclub.com. Registration is now open for our next immersion. This one is called Cosmic Breath, a pranayama immersion. And it will run from November 1st through December 21st of this year, 2017. This is a deep dive into the breath. In this immersion, we're studying experiential anatomy and physiology of breathing, intermediate pranayama techniques, and developing a daily pranayama practice with skill and curiosity. For the time being, we're running some special early bird pricing, which will run through August 8th. And you can learn more by following the link in the show notes or just by heading over to sunroseyogashop.com. Finally, our 150-hour advanced teacher training will run from March 2018 to June 2019. Registration and details will be up on my main site, sunroseyoga.com, by the end of the week. Ooh, one last thing. Sorry, forgot. We have this really fun art sound project in the works, and I would love it if you, dear listener, would answer the following questions, which will be shared on a future episode. 1. Why do you practice yoga? 2. What are your most potent practices? You can send your answer along with your name and your global location to me at sunroseyoga@gmail.com. So you can do this in written form, just answer those questions and I will read what you write into the episode. But it would also be super amazing if you created a voice memo on your smartphone or into your computer and send that to me via email. Please introduce yourself, like I'm Kelly from Portland, Oregon, at the beginning of your clip. Finally, really finally this time, every month I donate 15% of my income to organizations and funds that align with the mission and values of my work here. And for June, any purchases made in the Sunrose Yoga Shop, the Wildcat Yoga Club, any immersions, any classes, any privates will support One Girl Can Society and Global Justice Ecology Project. You can learn more about each of these organizations by following the link in the show notes over at yokedpodcast.com. Thanks so much for being here. Love. How did you find yoga? How did the yoga find you?
So, when I was maybe 12, I had been a dancer always, like so many of us, and, like ballet as a little kid, and tap, and jazz, and modern, and in the small town, but ski town in Idaho where I grew up, there was yoga taught in the Sun Valley Athletic Club downstairs from where I did dance classes. Ooh. And so I was just able to just start doing that. I would be at the athletic club by myself after dance class, and I could just go down and take that class.
Oh, nice.
It was really I don't remember the first time that I did it. It was I remember noticing it and then being like, hey mom, I'm going to stay and do this. And then doing it. And Richard Odom was the teacher. He's still teaching classes in that town. Now he's old. It's great. Yeah. And his, that was good for me. I remember coming out of those classes and he taught basically standing classes and floor classes, and the timing was that I went to the floor classes, which makes sense. I mean, I think eventually I started trying to do his standing classes, and there was way more strength demand than I was naturally, flexible and from dance, and I did not have and still work on the stability end of the practice.
Yeah.
And so I did the floor classes with him and really had the sense of leaving and having more energy than when I had started, in that beautiful way where the I am so constitutionally oriented toward the witness and toward the exchange. And to have and even then, there were mirrors in the room, and I was so aware of my body, I was 13, and I was precocious in other ways too, so it was familiar for me to be with so many adults and be the only young person in the room, and familiar in a particular way of getting a certain kind of attention, and even still, there was enough yoga in the room that I got to have experiences that were not about the exchange outside of my body, where I was in relationship with myself. Yeah. So that was the beginning. Yeah. And then what? I practiced with him, and I went to college in New York, and I did some Ashtanga in New York, of course, and brought the Ashtanga practice back with me to Idaho in the summers, and there was a guy there who would hold space for Mysore style practice, and I would do that at 5 a.m. in the summer a lot, and just sweat out all the gin that I drank at night.
Oh yeah, this is so familiar. Yes.
And then I graduated from college and I was like walking around giving out resumes to bars, because like I was going to be a bartender after graduating from Columbia, and I went into there was a like help wanted sign posted on the door of the Himalayan Institute New York branch in the West Village, where I was dropping off resumes at bars. And I went upstairs, and I actually like Nishichi, who was the guy who was looking for help. He I like got off the elevator, you know, and he was like, "Oh, you're gonna work for me now." You know? Yes. And he says that I cried. That my response to that was like just and so then I did work for him, and I worked for him for like 9 months, during which time, you know, in like classic you know, like hierarchical and like cozy Indian yoga fashion, he like told me what to do all the time, and like what would happen to me if I did the bad thing that he was telling me not to do, you know, like the ultimate, you know, like I definitely did not think that he knew that I was like having sex with my like on again off again boyfriend, but in a way where like I was just kind of taking the sex from the boyfriend. And you're like, obviously, why would he know that? But he was like, if you keep doing this thing where you're taking the sex, then like, I can't even remember what his threat was, but it was like the natural, you know, karmic implications of that are this. And I was like, God. It was like that. Yeah. So one of the things he told me I had to do was the teacher training. So I did the teacher training. They paid the studio at the Himalayan Institute, because it was the New York branch of the Honesdale, Pennsylvania retreat center, like that Swamiji founded, kind of in duality with the hospitals that he had built in India. So they're like partner sites. So I did that training the same summer that I met my husband.
What was that? How did you respond to sort of the, you know, the aspect of that teacher-student relationship where you're being told what to do and like talk to about consequences? What was that like?
Yeah, I mean, I would say like two big things that felt, you know, either like in conflict with each other and also balancing to each other, that I felt parented in a way that was wonderful, you know, and like sorely lacking in our culture. Yeah, like my mother was a wonderful person, did much more of the like, we'll do whatever you want style, where then you find out later that that's not really what she meant. But like it's even hard to find out, and like she's finding out later that that's not what she meant,
right?
And that was especially true in college, because, you know, what she was telling herself was that she wasn't allowed to tell me what to do, and at the same time they were paying for my life, and it was like above their means, and I didn't know how to be at college, but I'm the first person in my family to graduate from college, so, like generationally, so she also didn't feel like she knew what I should be doing. So to be inside, culturally inside a space where someone is saying, I do know what you should be doing, and I'm going to tell you real clearly what you should be doing, was like, brand new kind of parenting for me. And at the same time, I was, in a lot of ways, bumping into the patriarchal, hierarchical aspect of it. And that place was very much a bunch of Indian guys. And like Nishiji upstairs was fighting with, can't remember his G, but this other guy who was running East West Books downstairs. And they were like bickering all the time about where the money came from. And then there were like a couple more old Indian guys in the basement who were like moving the coins around, and everybody's telling you which side you should lay on after you eat, and what about your food isn't good, and like all the things. And also with some of them, with all of them in certain ways, there was overtones or undertones of uncomfortable sexual politics.
I did my teacher training in a ashram school setting where it's very similar response, where there's that, where part of it is very comforting. Like at that time, I was all up in my head, and it was useful to have someone just say, here's the practice, just do it. And, you don't need to know why. You don't need to be able to understand why at this point. Right. And there was a part of that, like, for me at least, was very necessary for the practice itself to take root. But then on the other hand, there are all sorts of undercurrents with respect to, sovereignty and almost, the opposite of self-awareness and self-reflection that,
right.
But yeah, it's interesting how that is part of it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I feel like as a teacher that, it is the harder part for me to say, do this.
Yes.
Like, it's fine. I'll take responsibility. You do this, and things will get better for you. I don't do that very much. And it means to me that I'm asking more of the students. And which is interesting because I teach foundations a lot, and I'm coming to them and saying, this is not a brand new place. This is on your continuum. You got here. You're still in charge of you in this room.
Yes.
And you have expertise that I'm going to ask you to attune to. And that, that's just what it has to be for me.
Right.
But oh yes, like I when I say that to people, and when I say, or when I know in myself, I don't work very much with mantra right now. I don't work very much with japa or with, I don't do these things, especially as a teacher, because I can't truly hold that form for you to pour yourself into. Even though it was a relief for me to pour myself into that form at times.
Absolutely. There's the two components of practice as a teacher are, it's such an interesting conversation and dynamic where there are, at least in my experience, like there is my own practice has to exist on its own, and it is most certainly different from my practice as a teacher. And making sure that there is time and space for both is so necessary. But I feel like it has taken me really like this long, 20 years of practice and 11 years of teaching to like, you know, find the titration like that right now works. Because I think you know, there's a certain aspect of teaching where, yes, you do teach your practice. You have to know what it is you're teaching, but you can't teach you can't just teach your practice, because then you're too in it. It's too raw, and nobody feels safe because there's no boundary, and there's, you know,
including me.
Right, yeah. And
yeah, when I mean, for so long, the story I had was that you were supposed to practice what you were going to teach. And that was almost always bad for my body. And
in what way?
Well, now one of the frames I have for it is scoliosis. So my practice doesn't look like people's practices when they have more symmetry. In like some significant ways. So that's a kind of listening to myself where my practice looks quite different. But in other ways too, I had that story, I think, in part around earning authority. And I felt that I couldn't ask people to do these things if I wasn't doing them, or, you know, I'm not sure.
Yeah.
And now there's such a huge space for me, like you say, where I'm the teacher and I'm asking them to do it for them.
Yeah.
And the practice of teaching is, you know, the practice of like seeing and understanding bodies, and the practice of holding a really confident, clear space where I say listening to yourself is safe. Listening to yourself is required. You know, those pieces. And that, of course, like comes out of the practice, right? It comes out of my practice. Yeah. But even though, exactly like you say, I'll come to class and say, I'm playing with this. This is something I'm playing with. Like, it's fun for me. But if there's too much, right? Like, I can't use the teaching to satisfy myself.
Right.
Yeah. Which is such a, like, that, I feel like a big part of the depth of that knowing comes from steady practice, but also from parenting. You know?
Oh, yeah.
That's like, yeah, to, I have to be showing up for you, not for me.
Every breath.
Ah!
Oh, so you met your husband.
I met my husband the same summer I did that teacher training. I lived in New York for another several months after that, teaching at the Himalayan Institute, like totally weird New York, Indian, like, you know, pastel carpet room. You know, like the place that I came into being a yoga teacher is so different from the like ubiquitous, what it looks like, you know, which I love that. That, like, when I think back to that, you know, I'm like, oh God, the anatomical cues were just wretched, you know?
No, I know. I know.
And also, it's partially because those people didn't care about bodies that much. It wasn't about the body. And of course, you know, we're obsessed with. So there's the braiding or the you know, of those experiences. But I did that for a short time, And then I moved to be with my now husband back to Idaho where I grew up. And I taught there at a studio called The Sacred Cow that was Marielle Hemingway's yoga studio. Uh-huh. And I managed that place, of course, for a long time, and like taught all different kinds of classes there, and grew up a lot in that community as like like my teaching then was very much like vinyasa practice with like some quotations from some Rumi, that thing. Yeah. Which was great. And that's not what it's like at all now. But it was, and I like hurt myself some there, but like my body could still handle it then. But, that's where I like learned about Anusara, and none of that shit works for me at all. But like I tried those good things that work for some people did not work for me. Yeah. But I got to taste a lot of different things in my body during that period. And traveled a lot, and Jeff and I went to India for 6 months before we moved to Portland. So that was really juicy to get to have that experience, where I had a particular view of India processed through these leaders in my life and through the yoga stories, and that was really a great opportunity for me to say, oh no, the yoga's in here, it's not out there. Big time. Yeah. And then we moved to Portland, and then we lived on a farm for like 6 months, and then we got pregnant, and we moved to Portland and started the section of time that is now 10 years. Yeah. Like this summer is 10 years from the summer that I was living on the farm, and we got pregnant with Zelda on the farm. So I'm feeling very much the like, oh, I see now that this 10 years has been one thing. Yeah. And that one thing has been, living in this house my house is really close to your house. I never knew that. Living in Northeast Portland, watching gentrification happen, getting my first like real serious peek under the covers of racism and power in the United States. Parenting my kids, being at home a lot, big garden in the yard, teaching at the People's Yoga. Yeah. That's like 10 years.
And so what's your practice like?
I lay on my back a lot.
I'll leave it very broad. What's your practice like?
Right?
Yeah.
In a way that I'm sure you can identify with or recognize, my practice feels percolated at this point through my entire everything. Yeah. My practice is like the 10 minutes in between asleep and awake. It's the anytime I feel an emotional hook, it's just attending to the way I attend to the practical matters of my life. It's physical, like really physical presence with my children. And it's also a lot of spinal traction done by me, on me, not through external means. I lay on my back a lot. I do a lot of, for the last I do Pilates kind of stuff for myself, a lot of that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
Which I think of as like PT kind of.
Yeah, I hear you. I have to do daily PT in order to function.
Yeah, I do a lot of that stuff. I meditate. And actually right now my meditation is like, it feels like this such a core piece. Mm-hmm. And at the same time, it feels like a relatively recent thing. I mean, the last couple years where I have like full permission from myself to have it look different ways. Mm-hmm. I feel like prior to that, and I mean, still this is a vibe for me, but much less so. Like they're starting to get braided together, the hardness and the collapse. Mm-hmm. But the hardness was like, it has to look like this. Mm-hmm. You have to sit for this amount of time. There has to be this consistency. And then the collapse was like, just an inability to tolerate that, or to make it happen, or whatever. Mm-hmm. And my kids have always been early risers, and like really early risers, and that's fading now. And my husband is not an early riser, so like bad time for me to opt out. Yeah. And that's actually fading as my older one, who was like really an early riser. She now is like, she's 9, and she sleeps in, like past 6:30. Wow. It's something. And it has given me that feeling of autonomy or sovereignty inside of it. And also there's been like a ripening. And so just recently I noticed that I was having a really, like I'm moving into the season where the garden has to get watered almost every day, or every day, depending. Mm-hmm. And the best time to do that is the morning. Mm-hmm. And I was like, man, I'm finding myself like sitting on my pillow inside, worrying about when the garden is going to get watered. Mm-hmm. And so now I just don't do that. And like, if the garden doesn't need to be watered, then I get up and I walk around in it, and that's it. That's what happens for a half hour. And if it needs to get watered, then I do that. And another trend I've been noticing in the political environment, in my like education, in like the karma of power and privilege, as the fountain of that in me. Mm-hmm. I have less connection to joy than I would like, because I spend a lot of time with that. Mm-hmm. So, then my meditation practice right now has a lot of gratitude practice in it, as a feeder. So it's like the meditation ends up being that I walk around and water my garden and do gratitude practice, and just like do elemental practice, seeing the water and seeing the plants and and that's what it looks like right now. Mm-hmm. And that, how it takes the time of filling the vessel to then say, I can change the shape of the vessel without fear that that it will all fall out. Or that it won't be there, and I'm like dipping back into Buddhism again right now, which like I consider myself a Buddhist. Mm-hmm. But it's been a while of really like worshiping in the body for me. Mm-hmm. And just recently I've had the feeling of like, oh, maybe a teacher will come to me. Maybe I'll be ready for someone to speak in metaphor to me again, or in symbols, which I've been really relieved to not have that. Like studying with Todd, and studying with Amy, and going more of the body-mind centering route has been... I have such a metaphor mind. It's been really good practice for me to yeah, and like Pilates and like, you know, to have structure, to say this thing does not mean this other thing.
Right.
And everything isn't connected. And it's not.
And it's fine. It's like, yeah, it's fine for us to just have a fully embodied experience of this moment. And it's huge. And it's like such a gift. And how many, I mean, just...
And the yoga's in here.
Yeah.
It's not out there.
Yeah.
It's in here.
Yeah.
But now I'm feeling a little like, and I studied Buddhism a lot, and I'm like touching one thing. So I have a student who's a philosophy professor at Clark College in Vancouver and at University of Portland. And so she's asked me to come and teach her class a little bit sometimes, like help. And so she is wanting me to teach about Buddhism, and I was like, okay, I'll teach about non-duality because this is a big, important piece, and really not... It's hard to get through our cultural layers to that place, right? Mm-hmm. And so she was like, okay, great. What text do you want to have them read? And I was like, like there was just like a total blank for me because my experience of non-duality is all embodied. Mm-hmm. Like that's where the practice is. Right. It's all like watching and being and watching. Mm-hmm. You know?
Yeah, absolutely. I do. Yeah.
And it was funny because I was like, shit. Like, what am I going to offer these kids in an hour? Mm-hmm. Like, what I want to tell them is so many hours of just being on the inside and having it be okay that neither thing is true.
Right.
Only. And having it be okay that, yeah, like, you know, the language in the text is all emptiness, 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 you know? And I'm like, well, that's not the word that I feel when I do it. But okay.
Yeah.
And I have been such a word person, and I'm a writer and a reader, and it's interesting to bump into that and realize that I've given myself this gift of not having to translate.
Right.
In teaching yoga, I have not had to translate these experiences into non-experiences. Right. I can just let them be experiences and offer them that way. And offer space for those experiences to arise for other people. And it's such a gift.
Yeah. It's, you know, language is so... It's such an interesting aspect to the overall communication of the teaching. Because so much of it is like unraveling those attachments and connections to certain words and letting it be okay that if you were to put a limiting word on an experience, it's fine if it wouldn't make sense to anyone else. Like if it's like sleeping bag or like, I mean, like, which has happened to me where I'm just like, oh, rutabaga. I mean, like, but that in and it's, oh God, so many times. Like, just randomness. But that is some of the most potent, like that's the place where it's all happening. Oh, yeah. Oh my gosh. Oh.
Yeah. 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 I mean, when I think about I'm going to go talk to this Clark College class, you know, they're like, these are like mostly kids. And I'm like, okay, I'll have them read the Heart Sutra, and like that's where we'll start, because not too long, right. But like everything's there, right. And not that I understand it, but that's why everything's there, is because that's not what it's not about understanding it, any of it, right? Yeah. And the thing that I think to say to them, like the place that I come to in a non-thinking way is, or on the edge of my thinking, is like when you read it, it's the feeling you have that you work with.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
It's not the words that you work with. It's the feeling you have when you read the words.
Mm-hmm. And the feeling is so much more practical, really practical than the words could ever be.
And the possibility for non-duality is in the feeling, not in the words.
Mm-hmm. And there's something, I don't know how this is in other cultures, but here, at least, and in my experience, you know, all of these words and language itself, like, really tend to perpetuate a certain, like, a distance from the actual experience and shroud things in a kind of mystery that is then marketable, if that makes sense, where it's like, oh, here's the script, here's the stuff, which will, you know, make this saleable, and then, but the actual experience is just so, like, much more concrete. And so then it's like, when you have those two things rubbing up against each other, it's a very interesting place. Like, if you're looking at sort of this, these education systems as an industry. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean...
So weird.
Yeah. Whoa.
God.
I've found myself in the last year in a couple situations where I was not sure what students were wanting of me, but they were wanting something. And then finally I had occasion to basically say no. And not like, no, I won't help you, or no, you're not allowed, or something, but really like, I mean, yes, that, in the sense of like, you can't get it. Mm-hmm. You're not going to get it, even if you try this way, or even if you try this other way, and you're trying so hard, and that's really lovely, and no. Mm-hmm. And those times have felt, you know, I just did it the other day, you know, that no, we're not going to heal you. No, it isn't going to be different after this than it was before. Mm-hmm. Have felt like the kind of parenting that has been so hard and so important for me to get to be able to be totally like, I am totally present with you. I have so much compassion. Also, no. Like, I'm going to make a space for you that is no. Mm-hmm. For you to be like safe and run into this. I'm not afraid to say it to you. I'm not afraid for you. I'm not afraid of what you will do. And that has felt, when that happens, then I'm like, okay, now this is spiritual work. Now, well, I couldn't figure out why am I chosen? Like, I'm not your therapist, I'm not your sister, I'm not your mom, I'm not your best friend. What are you wanting me to be? And when the no comes out, then I'm like, you're wanting me to be a spiritual teacher for you. Mm-hmm. And this is what that looks like.
Right.
Which is like so deeply anti-capitalist in the way of, you can't, like, this is not something you can consume.
Mm-hmm. And that takes time. It takes time to find your sea legs or your teaching legs.
Yeah.
To, in the broader sense, be a little more clear on what the offering is. Yeah.
And the confidence in what I feel like I'm going for words like true and real.
Yeah,
and like my mom gave me, do you know I am that? I can't even remember this guy's name. He's got, he's like rude.
Oh, is it Swami Muktananda? I am that? Or
no. He's a guy I'd never, and I think it's a really classic text, and I just didn't know, and my mom gave it to me for Christmas, and I was like, thanks, Mom. And now I'm reading it, and it's hilarious. It's like 2 inches thick, this book, and the entire thing is like question and answer, kind of like Krishnamurti style, and the whole thing is people just being like, but isn't it like this? And him being like, no.
No.
It's really just 2 inches of that. And they're like, but can't I get it like this? And he's like, no. No. You have to stop trying that. You should stop trying to do that. And the rest of the time, he's saying all these words that are like real and true and present, and words that don't mean anything. They're like rutabaga, sleeping bag.
Yes. Yeah.
And like rutabaga and sleeping bag are so wonderful, because they mean something that we can agree on. And because we are like, so they're smaller, and we're so much more able to be like, rutabaga can mean like, to me, rutabaga means like my grandmother, and the like not as wet as a turnip when you smash it, and the rose color that it is, and the flavor of butter and thyme. Right? But like for tons of people, rutabaga means, I think it's a gross root vegetable.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Or like any number of things.
Right.
They eat it a totally different way, and it's so delicious. Or they're, they live in India, and they're like, no, actually it's called this, and this is what you do with it. And that's true, true, or like present, or whatever. We do that universalizing to it, where we say, no, it means the same thing to everybody.
Yeah.
And then we're stuck. Then it's broken.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
What? Or I guess, why? Why do you stay with the practice?
I don't think that I have a choice. Like, pretty fundamentally at this point. I say to people all the time, you can't fall out. You can't fall off. You can't fall out. Because that feels real to me. But I was just saying today to someone, and I was just thinking this, like being struck by, as I was riding my bike to teach this morning. A student of mine just wrote me, was like, oh, I can't meet this week. My aunt died. I have to go. Oh, how much time did we do? An hour? Is that an hour?
That's just 45 minutes.
Oh, we're doing really good.
Yes.
We're doing so good. So she, the student of mine, she, is going to be with her family, which is like, in particular for this person, I know there's a lot there, and to be with her family in grief. And I had just told her about Linda Berry, and she didn't know about Linda Berry. And so she, like, in the same email letting me know that she wouldn't be able to meet, was like, oh, I just picked up Cruddy. And I was like, that's great. You're going to take a really intense book with you to do a really intense thing. But doesn't good art almost always help? And I felt that, thinking about that or feeling that, I think of that so often, like I love blues music. And that thing that's like, it isn't about making it less ugly or painful or all the things that it is. And the way that the light of attention, like loving attention, shines over all of it, means that it can be good without being any less bad. And I feel like that about practice.
Yeah.
That you can have a really good practice that's just so full of just the squirm of making the same mistakes over and over again.
Oh my God, yes.
Yeah.
So one thing, a thread that we have that has sort of woven itself through our conversation and through what I think I know about you as a teacher is this, is the relationship, is, the connection or the communication between you and the teachings and the student. And I'm curious, since you teach for Yoga Anytime and you filmed, how did that play out when you were teaching for film?
Yeah, I was saying to someone recently that I know teachers who I think are great teachers who are able to have the teachings be like in the middle between the teacher and the student. And it makes like a buffer in a way. And I think that can be really spacious for the students and spacious for the teacher. And that's not how I work at all. Like at all. I'm really like the drawing that somebody used when I was like, like maybe in high school, maybe even earlier than that. And it was a English teacher teaching me about how ideas work and like what a book does. It's like a stick person and a stick person, and this stick person is connected to an idea, and this stick person is connected to an idea, but like what the hell happens in between the two stick people? And in this case, it was like a drawing of a book, and the stick person's bubble connects to the book, and the book connects to the other person's bubble and down into the other stick person. And I don't experience I don't feel like what's in the middle is the same for both of us.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
Ever.
Yeah.
Like I don't feel that. The Argonauts.
Mm-hmm.
She talks about, like at the very beginning, she talks about her like faith in trying to communicate an experience, even though it's impossible to communicate the experience.
Mm-hmm.
And that's where it's at for me.
Yeah.
Is like so much of being like in front of the camera was having to really root into just try your best to communicate the experience without the other person, without knowing like so much of how I have the ability to try to communicate my experience is the natural aptitude of sensitivity that I have milked my whole life, right? Like sensitive first girl child, skills. I have a pretty good guess about what it's like for you, and I can speak to that. And that is like this beautiful skill, and also it takes me out of me and puts me into you.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm not in you. Like, really fundamentally, I'm not in you. Yeah. And the direction of my teaching for sure is stay in your own space. Speak from your own personal, local, immediate. Make a solid space where you ask the other people to do the same. And in the asking, you're the teacher. And so Yoga Anytime was like, if there weren't Kira, I would have died. Like it would not even have happened, you know?
Yeah.
But she is so loving, you know, that she's like, I'm just gonna love you right through this. And then we'll take a swim. And it felt, I felt like I came up against all kinds of wanting to control the other person's perception and wanting to control the other person's experience and feeling that because there was no other person to control, that I was adrift. And that is so the moment when you're like right back in my own skin. I guess I'll just try to say as clearly as I can what my experience is.
Yeah. There's it's just like the identification of the container that we bounce off of or make contact with in any situation. It's just so like it's such useful learning. Like, what am I pushing off of? What am I, in whatever subtle way, rebelling against or distancing myself from, just to kind of identify, what am I, who am I, what is this? It's such a fascinating...
And you say that with someone inside of you who is doing precisely that thing.
Yeah.
Like laying the foundation of selfhood through contact. Yeah, with limits. And yeah, I feel like I say that a lot, and it's that same thing, you know, with like teaching something like the Prajnaparamita. I'm like, go to the place where you have the most feeling, right? And see what the feeling is, and see what the opposite feeling would be, and see how agitated the feeling is in response to any potential shift. And like, then you can even go away from that. Like, then you made an edge.
Right.
And if it's too uncomfortable to be at the edge, then cool. You go away from it, but like, there it is. You know where the edge is.
Oh, yeah.
And I'm aware of a tendency in some of the less boundaried practices and less boundaried bodies, including mine, that I work with, to want to dissolve that edge with the practice. And and I watch that in myself.
I'm so glad we did this. Thank you so much.
Thanks so much for listening to today's podcast. Complete show notes are available at yokedpodcast.com. Please feel free to connect by emailing me at sunroseyoga@gmail.com. Today's episode is made possible by the Wildcat Yoga Club, our online yoga community. The clubhouse contains an ever-expanding library of audio and video practices, plus lectures, tutorials, and video Q&A sessions, plus monthly online workshops in meditation, active listening, and embodied voice. Membership also includes discounts on all courses, retreats, and products in the Sunrose Yoga shop. All of this for $15 a month or $150 per year. Connect with the yoga of real life by visiting www.wildcatyogaclub.com. Thanks.